So I'll be talking to you today about walking with giants on the banks of a 130-million-year-old river. So this is part of the Wessex Formation on the Isle of Wight in the UK. This is where I live. It's a tiny little island off the south coast of England, and it's amazing for geology. So we have everything through from the earliest Cretaceous through to the Eocene, so about 100 million years worth of history. So what I'll be talking to you today is regarding the Wessex Formation, which is this darker blue area you see either side of the island. And this is about 130 to about 125 million years old. So the Isle of Wight has just a bit of brief history about the island's geology. Has undergone a little bit of folding and tectonic activity to produce the geology that we see today. So on this diagram, you can see there's a fault that's uplifting the basement Paleozoic strata up, which has caused this sort of fold you see right on in the bottom, which is why we have a chalk ridge down the middle of the island, which you can see on this diagram here, this white line going through the middle, and Cretaceous rocks to the south, and the younger Eocene rocks to the north. So the period we're looking at today it's in the Hauterivian to Barremian, so it's in the lower part of the Cretaceous. So again, about 30 to about 25 million years old. And the Wessex Formation here comprises of a series of clays and sandstones, and it's absolutely beautiful. This is Compton Bay. You can see this red cliff to the right. This is the Wessex Formation leading down. As you walk along the beach, you get progressively younger. So you've got the green sand right at the very end, and then the chalk cliff heading out to sea. And the Wessex Formation it's just my favorite formation. The sandstones are absolutely beautiful. You can see one here in the top right. You get this nice weathering and cross bedding, which are fossil ripples. And the top left is a really, really nice paleosol. So you can see all the little lines and cracks, which are made through animals and plants going into the soil and different states of oxidation. So how much water was in the soil, things like that. So we get also some really nice ripples in the sandstones. So things like this we use to sort of build up a picture of what was happening in our river system. So there's a couple of really, really big sandstones. The biggest one's Sudmore Point sandstone, which is down further south, the south coast. It's about 10 meters thick, and it's a big meandering river, sort of point bar sandstone. And ripples like this indicate that it was sort of a unidirectional flow and quite fast flows at times, and then proceeding to be more gentle currents. And this is when we form the ripples. The faster flows sort of destroy the ripples and wear them down. But what's very special with the Wessex Formation is that we have these things called plant debris beds. And they're throughout the Wessex Formation. The Wessex Formation's about 80 meters thickish. And they're intermittent throughout the formation. You see these dark black lines here in this sedimentary log. And these are interpreted to be flash flood events. So we know the Wessex Formation was very seasonal. So we had the wet season and the dry season. I think in the wet season, these were big flash floods that brought down a lot of debris, sort of burnt wood, and anything that was caught up in that flow. So any dead animals, anything that was lying around, then deposited in large hollows on the floodplain, possibly like ponds or billabongs, anything like that. And it's actually preserved. These are anoxic sediments. So we have pyrite forming iron sulfide, which is an indicator of anoxic environments. But this is where mostly all of our fossils come from. They're just brilliant horizons where everything just got picked up and dumped in a pile, which was dead or dying on the floodplain, and just preserved, just instantly buried in mud that didn't have oxygen in it. So this is what we think our Wessex Formation floodplain may have looked like. So we had a huge river flowing down through the middle, estimated to be 1 to 2 kilometers wide at some points. We had a hilly area to the north where the forests were, which brought down a lot of the plant material. And around the floodplain, we've got little lakes, sort of oxbow lakes, ponds, areas that were seasonally flooded, stranded logs on the riverbanks, forming log jams. And all of these create a series of very different and great environments to support a very high biodiversity within the system, which is what I'll be talking you through today. So the Isle of Wight is most famous for its dinosaurs. This is why everyone comes here. And we have a total at the moment of 21 dinosaurs that have been described and counting. I know there's people working on new dinosaurs right now. There's dinosaurs that are still in collections and still in the museums that haven't been prepared yet. So all sort of ready and waiting. So I think in the next few years, we'll see a very high increase in the dinosaurs here. And we had 4 new dinosaurs last year, which I think is really, really impressive. So we've got 4 main groups. So the ornithopods, these are the herbivorous dinosaurs, a bit like the hadrosaurs you get in the States. And chylosaurs, we've only got 1 at the moment. There might possibly be 2 in the future. And chylosaurs called Polycanthus. It's a little armor-plated dinosaur, which I'll show you in this talk. And then the theropods, we've got quite a very, very high diversity of theropods through Baryonyx, Ceratosuchops, and Venator. And these are the Spinosaurs. The last 2 are new from last year. Eotyrannus is the first Tyrannosaur. Neovenata is an allosaur. We have some little raptors in there as well. So it's quite interesting that it's a very high diversity of theropods compared to the herbivorous dinosaurs. Then our sauropods as well, we've only got a few that have been confidently named. But the rest are very tentative because the sauropod remains here are very fragmentary, and it's very hard to actually find anything that has diagnostic features or is complete enough to actually get a name from. So I'll start with a bit of history of the fossil collecting, and this guy is sort of the Isle of Wight dinosaur man, Reverend William Fox. He was a reverend or a curate at a church in Bryston, which is a little village on the south coast. And he was a curate up in Salisbury, I believe, and he got transferred to the island, and he always had an interest in geology. So he started going around the island looking at the geology we have here. But as he was walking along the south coast, he started to find dinosaur bones. Dinosaurs were only fairly new back then. I mean, I think Richard Owen had just coined the term dinosaur in the 1840s. But this guy, he amassed over 500 specimens from our Isle of Wight cliffs in the time that he was on the island. And he was actually credited with finding 5 new dinosaurs. So Polycanthus, Hypsilophodon, Euchemosaurus, Calamosaurus, and Aristosuchus. And this is him. And it's amazing because he only had the very simplest of tools, prepared everything with a hammer and chisel, but he did a brilliant job. And his work was so important. He was actually friends with John Hulk and Sir Richard Owen, who frequently came down to the island to see what he was finding, to then take away to the British Museum to publish on and name. So this was one of the first ones he found. This is the Polycanthus specimen, which is just, I think, absolutely beautiful. If you could find a dinosaur, I'd want to find a sacral shield of a Polycanthus. This is the armor plating over the hips of the animal. So you can see the hips on the right image, the 2 long bones either side and the vertebrae going up. And it's got this very detailed ornamentation, and the fossil is just incredible. But he's got this is one of my favorite phrases or quotes from Reverend William Fox. "I cannot leave this place while I have money left to live on. I take such a deep pleasure in hunting for old dragons." And I think it's something that almost all of the fossil collectors, especially on the island, completely agree by and probably live by as well. So this is Polycanthus to give you an idea of what the animal might look like. So we're talking about a very stumpy animal covered in spines. Its head was just solid bone with spines coming out of it. This was an animal that you wouldn't have argued with. It was definitely one of those animals that would have turned around and fought back. It wouldn't have run away. We've got a nice little tooth down in the left corner. The teeth from this animal are incredibly rare. I'm not sure why. I only know of one or two that have ever been found, and this is one of them. Just one of those things. I think even the skull that my friend found didn't have teeth in. And there's a nice spine there as well. So this is another one that Reverend William Fox found called Hipsloth, a very small little animal. It's a type of ornithopod, so a little herbivorous dinosaur. When it was first found, they thought it might be a juvenile iguanodon, so a baby of a bigger animal. But all the bones were fully fused, so it was determined it was an adult, and then realized to be something completely different. So this is kind of what it looked like in life, we think. So it's a very, very slim, gracile animal, probably be about the size of a golden retriever in life. Here's a specimen that my friend found made green from a sandstone unit down the beach in the cliff, and the preservation is just incredible. And there's this amazing thing with the Hipsloth is there's actually a bed called the Hipsloth bed, and it preserves complete articulated specimens of Hipsloth. And I think there's been about 200 found over the last as many years. I know quite a few people that have found one. And they range from being fully grown adults through to animals that are about the size of a magpie. So we know that they at least are living in like family groups maybe, or herds ranging from hatchlings through to older adults. And there's several beds throughout the sequence where it's like a mass mortality. So we think maybe they were just very small and they got caught up in mudslides or stuck in the mud or something like that. But they're brilliant little animals. So this is to give you an idea of what we deal with on the island in terms of finding dinosaurs. So I know in the States you have sort of the Hell Creek Formation, it's way out in the Badlands. And if you find a T-Rex, it's going to be there the next summer for you to dig out. It's not going anywhere. But on the island, all of our dinosaur bearing rocks are on the beach. They're cliff sections, or they're actually under the water. We have to wait until the tide goes out to be able to get to them. And these cliffs erode very rapidly at some places, sometimes sort of up to a meter a year, even more. There's active landslips. So when we find something good, it's either a case of organizing a dig very rapidly to go and rescue the specimen in the cliff, or if the cliff's too unstable, it is a case of waiting and hoping that you find every bone that slowly erodes out. And I know that some collectors have actually been digging, they've been getting a bone by bone out of the cliff for about 30 years, and they still haven't got the whole animal. But this is the vadasaurus dig. So the vadasaurus is a small type of herbivorous dinosaur. And there's some of the collectors here. There's Nick Chase, who was an amazing collector. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. He's found many dinosaurs on the island. Jeremy Lockwood, who's currently doing his PhD on the dinosaurs here, and Steve Hutt and his wife Penny, who they ran the local museum a few years ago. This is the Vadasaurus specimen now, after it was prepared, and it's absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, the front half of the specimen was sticking out the cliff, so it was just lost to the sea, which is it's one of those things that we have to accept here. But we got almost every bone from the middle of the back through to the end of the tail. And it's not very big. This animal probably would have been about 4 meters long, but it's a superb, absolutely superb specimen. And this is another little ornithopod. It's very closely related to the Valdsaur, called Mantellosaurus. And this is almost complete specimen that was found by Nick Chase a few years ago. And as you can see, we've got the skull right at the very end through to the tail, limb bones. I've got the hands and the digits and claws. But again, this was another specimen that we couldn't dig it out of the cliff, really. It was eroding out bit by bit, and it was cases where one of the limb bones was broken into sort of 5 bits. One end was found 1 year, one end was found another year, and then the middle bit was found loose on the beach a few years later. And it's just luck that someone picked it up and recognized that it might come from this specimen. So we go into the nice theropods now. So this is Neovenata. It's a very, very complete specimen in terms of dinosaurs on the island. We've got quite a lot of it, a lot of skull material, the vertebrae, the limbs, and most of the tail. We think it's a type of allosaur. It's a very, very gracile animal, very, very narrow skull with nice sort of blade-like teeth. And there was a paper came out a few years ago where they'd CT scanned the snout of Neovenata, because the bone surface showed a lot of these foramen all over the bone. He wanted to see what it was like inside. And they actually discovered all of these really, really cool nerve endings and interlocking vessels within the snout, and kind of concluded that this thing had a very, very sensitive snout. We don't think it would have been an animal that was crushing through bone and biting off limbs. It would have been something that could have picked its way through a carcass using the sensors in its snout without hitting any of the hard bits, which I think is really, really cool. It could have been using that to do something else, sensing things, movement, anything like that. It's a very, very cool animal. And this is Eotyrannus. So this is our Tyrannosaur on the island. It is not an impressive specimen. We've got some skull bones from it. I think we've got possibly some vertebrae, and a couple of limb bones. That's about it. But what we do have is preserved very nicely. This is a piece of the maxilla, I believe, with a little tooth sticking out. And a couple of the things that we could identify as a tyrannosaur was the fused nasals. So the top of the skull in tyrannosaurs, the bones up there are completely fused. And it's the same in this animal, but also the teeth. You see this tooth on the left, it hasn't got a serration on the front and back. The back serration has come all the way forward, and is it the same level as the other serration? This forms a D-shaped cross-section, so the front surface is flat and the back is curved, and this is unique in tyrannosaurs. So this was a really, really nice identifying feature. But this animal is very, very small. This tooth with the root is only about 2 centimeters long, just under. And I think it's very impressive that this thing is the precursor of T-Rex. So 130 million years ago, this almost like raptor-like animal that was only a few meters long evolved into the big T-Rex that we get at the end of Cretaceous. And I think that's just, that's an incredible evolutionary path. So we go into some of the sauropods. So this is a Brachiosaur. So Brachiosaurs are the ones with the really long neck that's very tall, sort of almost vertical standing. And again, the bones on the island, sometimes they don't preserve very well. This is very cracked, it's crumbly, it's been crushed. The thing that's impressive with this bone on the right is how big it is. This bone is about 1 meter long, and this is one vertebrae from the neck. So when we scale this up, this comes out to an animal that is well over 20 meters long. And that's just huge for the early Cretaceous. Normally when we find cervical vertebrae, neck vertebrae from sauropod dinosaurs, if we get one that's probably about 20 centimeters long, 30, we say that's a really, really big animal. But this thing is just absolutely ginormous. And it's impressive to think how big these animals may have got in the Cretaceous, and we just haven't found them yet. So this is another example of a sauropod. This is a slightly different one called a Brachiosaur. They're a slightly smaller animal. They're the ones with the long whip-like tail. This is one of the neural arches with the centrum fuse, so a backbone. And again, quite a lot of the material on the Isle of Wight is fragmentary, especially with bigger animals. You think you've got a carcass laying out, it's going to get ripped apart, bits torn apart, dragged away. We really rarely find a whole animal of one of these. I think the biggest, most complete one we found has like under a third of the skeleton, if that. But this is just an excellent example of how nicely preserved some of the elements can be when we find them. So we're going on to some new dinosaurs now. So this is Vectiraptor greeneye, and this is an animal that myself and my colleagues named last year. And it's a little dromaeosaur type velociraptor animal, closely related to Velociraptor. We always knew that these raptors were here. People had been finding the teeth. There's some teeth in the top right. Some raptor teeth are very, very distinctive. They've got this nice recurve, these fine serrations. And these little vertebrae were collected by two of my friends, Mick Green and Nick Chase, at Compton on the southwest of the island. And there's only 3 scrappy vertebrae. They're not pretty to look at, and they're very small. But Mick prepped them up, and we went around his house. We started looking at them, and although they're very scrappy, they're broken. They contain some really, really diagnostic features on them. So they're very wide neural canal, this big hole you see, these indents in the vertebrae are very diagnostic, and there's a big foramina on the side, and the inside of the bone's very hollow as well. It's so difficult to see. These lighter patches are actually where they would have been air cavities. And we think these little raptor-like dinosaurs had a very bird-like skeleton. So if they store oxygen in their bones and things, it allows for a more efficient oxygen delivery system if you're actively running and pursuing after prey. This animal's quite small. He's only about 2 meters long, but it's the first of its kind for the Isle of Wight, which is really, really cool. So this was another one that came out last year called Brysonia simmondsi. It's named after the local collector Keith Simmons, who found it back in the 1980s, I believe. And at the time, it was just chucked in a box and called Iguanodon. Iguanodon tends to be like a waste paper taxon basket. So if you find an ornithopod vertebrae, you just say it's Iguanodon, it goes into that box. And Jeremy Lockwood, who you saw on a previous slide, he's now doing his PhD looking at the ornithopods, the iguanodons on the island. And he started going through this box with all the bones in, and he noticed that when you actually held the nasal bone, the bone on the top right, in life position, it had this huge ridge on it, this big process. And in life, in the restoration, it would have had a big nose, which was one of the main differences, which could have been used to maybe bellow, have bigger nostrils to make a sound, or used as a thing to attract mates, something like that. But what's also cool with this specimen is the vertebrae in the middle that you can see. The neural arch, the bit that goes up, has got a big curve in it. And this is where the neural spine was actually broken in life. There's a series of these along the back of the animal. So it must have been attacked or something like that. The spine actually broke off and went down at an angle. But what was amazing is this dinosaur healed. What you can see at the top is all regrown bone. It's completely regrown, healed over. So this injury it didn't kill the animal, which just shows how resistant these dinosaurs could have been. To have an injury like that and for it to heal and you can carry on is quite incredible. And this is just a funny thing. The Sun newspaper, which is it's a newspaper in the UK, did a nice front page cover of the dinosaur on the beach, and with a quote saying, "Scientists say supersized snoz, similar to the singer Barry Manilow, would have helped to attract females." And they've got a nice picture of Barry Manilow there. I just thought it was great journalism. You don't see something like that every day. So we go into two new exciting dinosaurs as well. This is Ceratoseucops. So these are actually Spinosaurs, related to a dinosaur called Baryonyx. It was on its way to being that famous Spinosaurus you get in Morocco. These have got a big sort of a crocodile-like snout with crocodile-like teeth. And these two specimens actually came out along with an iguanodon. And the bone is just absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful fossil. They've got a brain case here. They've got the upper part of the top of the head and the two snouts. And there's a really nice story that one of the collectors, a guy who found this, Kai Bailey, he was walking along the beach and he saw this snout sticking out of the sand. And he went and picked it up and he was shaking so much that he had to sit down because he knew exactly what he'd found. But since that discovery, they kept an eye on the site and more bones came out, and they found another specimen called Venator, a very similar animal. This one's got a crest on its head and the other one doesn't. There's some other differences. I'm not entirely sure whether they're two new animals or whether this could be male and female. They come from the same bed, same time period, exactly the same event. So it'd be really, really interesting if more was found to maybe indicate this might be male and female rather than two different dinosaurs. And they also found the tail of this animal, so bits of the tail, and they've got a whole articulated section. And this thing was huge. They laid it out in the lab, and the tail alone is probably it's about 4 meters long. It's really, really cool. It's got these very, very high elongate neural spines. So its tail would have been more like a newt tail. So we think that these dinosaurs were semi-aquatic. So this tail is indicating it has a tail more like a crocodile for swimming through the water, which is really, really cool. So this is what it would possibly would have looked like in life. You've got a nice artist restoration here from the press release, and this is the skeleton. It's a brilliant animal, and more of it's actually still coming out of the beach. The deposit where it was found is under the sand, and it's rarely exposed, so it's every now and again you get a nice exposure and you can go and find bits, but it's just waiting for those days where you can actually get to it and get bits out. So it's not just nice big dinosaurs we find. We get a lot of really, really nice dinosaur teeth. So dinosaurs shed their teeth throughout their life, a bit like sharks do. They keep replacing them. So you find lots of loose teeth. And these actually really give us an idea of what animals are living in our river system before we actually found the body fossils in quite a lot of cases, like the baryonyx and the different iguanodons. So these big leaf-shaped teeth, like you see on the picture on the right, the far right, that's an iguanodon tooth. We get these nice big theropod teeth as well, meat-eating teeth, and big crocodile teeth and things like that. So here's a nice example of a cliff, but it's a sandstone from the down Grange Way, I think. You can see these interbedded clays within, but to the trained eye, you start to see that at the bottom, you've got these big depressions going down into the clay. So one of them was dug out, and it actually turned out to be a huge iguanodon footprint, which is really, really cool. So we're not only just finding the body fossils of these animals, we're getting a lot of really, really nice footprints out of these deposits as well. The river floodplain really provided a great environment to preserve the footprints as such. And these ones were where the dinosaur walked down to a very like a deep, sticky mud. So he created a nice big hole in the mud, which then got infilled with the sand from the river and created a footcast. And there's an exposure called Hanover Point, where these things are very famous for coming out. And there's some, the ones on the left from Hanover Point, so we've got theropod at the top, one of the meat-eating dinosaurs, big iguanodon down the bottom, and in the middle is a sauropod. These are very bizarre feet. They've got more like elephant feet. They're a bit harder to spot. We also get really, really nice dinosaur footprints preserved in the clays on the foreshore. So when the tide goes out, you can there's sort of clays going out, and you can walk over and you might find a dinosaur footprint. The only unfortunate thing is the ones in the clays don't last very long. The clay is very crumbly and sticky, and it tends to just get eroded away if we've had a couple of storms or something. So we can only just take photos of these, but the big footcasts on the beach tend to last a lot longer. And I think at the last count, there was 150 footcasts on the beach at Hanover Point, which is really, really great. It's brilliant to take people down there and show them physical evidence that dinosaurs were here. So going to the other things that lived on our floodplain. So these are the pterosaurs. So this first one is Crocodiles. It's a big toothed pterosaur, and there's a little artist restoration. So the pterosaurs on the Isle of Wight aren't very common. Their bones are very paper thin, and they don't tend to preserve very well. They're very, very crushed. So this is quite a nice example of it's the top half of the skull we found. The next one is called Whitea. And this is a Tapijaro. These types of dinosaurs pterosaurs have the short, stumpy face with a big head crest. And this is what we described Whitea on. It was myself and some colleagues. And it is the tiniest fragment of pterosaur beak. It's only about 2 centimeters long. It's quite crushed, but has a definite downturn on the bottom margin and an upturn where it would go up into the crest. And as you can see from the cross section, the top right image, it's got a very paper thin bone wall. So that's how we were able to tell that it was pterosaur, and the upturn and the downturn was that it was a tapijarid. It's really pushing our luck with this one, I think. But it's the material we've got to work with on the island, and we make the most of it when we can. So this is another pterosaur. It's just a nice example. You've got an almost complete skull here, very elongate skull. This one's Isiodactylus. And this pterosaur is quite weird. It has very diamond-shaped teeth. Instead of being the long, big, pointy teeth that quite a lot of pterosaurs have. And I think quite often these teeth actually get mistaken for fish scales when you find them as fossils. This is another one called Glomorincus. And again, the fossil is not that much it's not a very pretty fossil, not that much to look at. But you can see it's triangular with 2 circles on the front. And these are where the teeth came out the front of the snout. So this bone is the very, very front of the top jaw, the very, very front. And it's what normally survives of Glomorincus. These things are very diagnostic, despite it being, it just looks like a warm pebble. So it's where the teeth are on the front, how tall it is, how wide it is, helps us narrow it down to what type of animal this came from. We've also got a few crocodiles in here. Here's 2 examples. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of the one on the right, but it's very similar to like a saltwater crocodile. It's I think the old name for it was Goniopholis. It reaches quite a size. The skull can go up to about 1 meter long, which I think is quite cool. It's quite a big animal. And then on the left, we've got a little crocodile called Comptodontosuchus. This translates to the button-tooth crocodile. So its teeth are very tiny, but they're completely round. They're like little domes, which are ideal for crushing shells and mollusks, things like that, maybe little turtles. So he was, I don't think we get any of these today that eat mollusks, but he was living in a different niche, so allowing for a higher diversity of crocodiles in our river system. We also get a few turtles. Complete turtles are very uncommon. So are the skulls. This skull was found by Nick Chase, I think about 20 years ago. It's one of the only ones that I know of from the Isle of Wight. But what we most commonly find is fragments of turtle shell. So here's one. You can see it's a very flat bone, and this one's got this very distinct dotting pattern over the surface. And that's normally what we just find from the turtles, although we're now looking at some other turtles that we think there's a few other ones in there. They're just not very common fossils, which I think is quite weird for the amount of fragments of turtle shell that we actually find out of the cliffs. Then we take a quick look at the microfauna. So these are all the animals that are very small. And it was kind of discovered by this guy called Steve Sweetman. And for his PhD, he started sieving the plant debris beds that we saw earlier and seeing if there was anything in them, because he'd heard someone had found some mammal teeth quite a few years ago. So he was recruiting people, going down and digging up buckets and buckets of this stuff. He made his own sieving machine at home, which comprised of sort of water sprinklers, so going over the mud and filtering it out to get the different size residues. And what he got was absolutely incredible. I think he got over 50 different new species, including tiny little lizards, like at the top here, little lizard jaws, new sharks. He even got mammals, he got little like frogs, things like that. So this opened up an entire new sort of like world to our floodplain. It was a glimpse into what could have been, well, what was living and scuttling amongst all the dinosaurs that most people didn't really ever know before, because they were all so focused on looking at the big dinosaur fossils because they're so impressive. We also get a lot of plant material as well. Quite a lot of this actually comes from the plant debris beds. There's some nice leaves and things occasionally come out. But the most common things are the pine cones. So we've got top left is a nice one in a pyrite. We've just got the impression there. Bottom left is the very nice sort of pine cone type seed pods out of the plant debris beds. But what we mostly find on our beaches is the fossilized tree trunks and big chunks of fossil wood. We think most of this was burnt in forest fires before being washed down onto our floodplain and buried. So it's very similar to it just looks like burnt fossil wood to the untrained eye, just burnt wood like charcoal, something like that. But it's filled up with iron pyrite, so it's extremely heavy. And occasionally you get these huge tree trunks come out. I think the one on the left was about 8 foot long. It was absolutely enormous. But they make really, really impressive fossils on the beach. But unfortunately, they're very unstable. They tend to just crumble and fall apart when they dry out, or the pyrite, there's something called pyrite disease, where the iron and sulfide decay and it just turns into a powder. So these things normally are just best left on the beach. They last longer on the beach than in a museum or something. We're also very lucky enough to get amber. It's some of the oldest amber in the world. Mainly comes from the plant debris bed. So this bottom right bit is a chunk of amber I found the other month. It's very crumbly. It's not like that nice Baltic amber that polishes up really well. It's very brittle. It doesn't last very. If you sort of try to polish it up, it will break. But it's sometimes full of insects. So there's been a fossil spider found preserved, which is that black and white image on the left. And a lot of sort of like little midges and things like that, found little flies and things. So it's a really great insight to another window of all the insects that were living on our floodplain as well. So using all these different fossils, we can actually build up a picture of what the whole ecosystem was like, from dinosaurs all the way down to little non-biting midges, which I think is brilliant. So this artist impression of what the Wessex Formation may have looked like. So we got a forested area, dinosaurs wandering around, big river. But it would have been, I think, absolutely amazing if we could go back in time and just see what was living in our rivers back in the Cretaceous. So sauropods are they're a type of dinosaur with the long necks and tails. Like this one, and they reach humongous sizes. So this is going into some research that we've been doing in the sauropods on the Isle of Wight. So the biggest one ever to walk the earth got to about 110 tons, maybe, Argentinosaurus, and about 40 meters in length. So into scale, the biggest one we have on the island is 20 meters long, so it would have been half the size of this one, but still very, very impressive. And here's some examples of just how big these animals got. So you've got a huge footprint here, probably about 6 foot in length, another big one here. And this is some of the bones. So this is I think this is a cast of a big, big vertebrae. They get up to 2 meters in height. And this is a big femur with David Attenborough as a scale. It was probably over 6 foot long. What we've been doing is looking at the dinosaur gastroliths, which are stomach stones that we think the dinosaurs ate to aid in digestion. So they couldn't eat, they couldn't chew. So what they were doing was literally just biting off branches, swallowing them, and they were sitting in their stomach. So they ate these stones to help grind down all of that food. And we've done experiments and they work very, very effectively. So these gastroliths here are the ones from our study. So you can see they're very, very highly polished. We've got several different types of lithology. And this is what we've been actually looking at. So we've got, I think it's about 6 or 7 different types of lithology. We've narrowed it down to coming from 2 areas outside of our river system. So we know that these dinosaurs were traveling to 2 distinct areas to get their gastroliths. This is a thin section of one of them. So we were looking at the internal structure of the bone, of the stones, to sort of narrow it down. They're very, very diagnostic, the mineralogy. And these big needle-like crystals are the tourmaline crystals. And these ones come from an area called Budleigh Salterton. It's a Triassic riverbed. And this is a piece of the silicified wood, which we didn't know what it was until we took a thin section, but it's incredibly impressive under the microscope. I think it's even more cool that these dinosaurs were actually eating fossils to aid in digestion. This was already a fossil when the dinosaurs were walking around. So this is where we think the dinosaurs went to get their gastroliths. So there's an area eroding called the Portland Purbeck area. So some of our gastroliths we know come from the Portland limestone, and that's about 15 miles away. But the most impressive one is the dinosaurs that went to get their gastroliths from the Triassic river conglomerates. These are all the very, very hard rocks with the tourmaline in, those black one and the red one we saw. And that's about 90 miles away from our floodplain, which I think is it's very, very cool. They're walking all the way upriver to go and get their gastroliths. We've got about 400 gastroliths in our study, maybe more. We're fairly confident that they're only coming from these 2 places. So we did some experiments with the gastroliths just to see how effective they were. So this is some pebbles of similar lithology within in a bucket. We put them into like a rock tumbler. So this is with horsetail and pine needles, which we think is the closest we could get to what the dinosaurs were eating on the floodplain, what plants we knew were there. And within 24 hours of it being in a rock tumbler, it was a plant soup. It was just a greeny smush. So we know that these gastroliths work very, very effectively, where we put them into a rock tumbler and polished them up to see if the plant material would create a polish, because it was always proposed that the gastroliths wouldn't be able to take a polish just through plant material. So we put them into a rock tumbler for over an extended period of time. And we actually found that just using the plant material by itself created a polish, like we saw on the first picture. But you can see on the left, the water and pine needles actually created a polish, whereas the water only didn't create a polish, only smoothed them off. And we think it's the silica in the plants that's being used as a fine abrasive. And it's one of those things that everyone thought these pebbles might have been just being carried downstream, and the polish may have been created from the water. But we now know that the pine needles and the equisetum is actually provides the silica to create that really, really high polish that we see. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of the Isle of Wight fossil collectors and fossil finders that kindly they go out and they rescue all of these fossils and donate them to museums to be studied, because without them, almost all of these fossils would be lost to the sea.